Hey guys, how's it going? Charles here from the Casual Dungeon, and today we're going to be exploring the question, is Dungeons & Dragons a cult? Well, for those of you who don't know what Dungeons & Dragons is, it's a role-playing board game, the first edition initially created by a guy called Gary Gygax in 1974. The game had phenomenal success and still has a massive worldwide following even now in 2020, with the most recent edition being the 5th. The game doesn't require a board. Players use their imagination to guide their characters through the world created by he or she who is the Dungeon Master. The best way I like to describe it is just the feeling of reading a great book but with your friends, and you all have a say in the way it goes. And the ending. Yes, at first glance you can definitely see why people think Dungeons & Dragons sounds pretty cultish, not to mention the Dungeon Master holds all authority over the game. So now we've cleared the fundamentals of the game, let's explore its complicated past in regards to being linked with the occult and satanic ritual. There are several cases in the past whereby Dungeons & Dragons has been sought to be banned by communities in America and around the world, especially when it launched in the 70s because of what people then thought was brainwashing their children. One of the most famous cases was that of a young boy who went missing after playing a game of Dungeons & Dragons and never returned. His parents were convinced the game changed him. That was in the 70s. James Dallas Egerbert III, a great name I know, was not the only great thing about him. He was actually a child prodigy and entered Michigan State University at just 16 years old to study computer science. Egerbert disappeared from his dorm room on August 15, 1979. Leaving a suicide note explaining the hard pressures he was facing, such as difficulties accepting his homosexuality and how he suffered with major depression. He disappeared into a local underground steam tunnel, a suspected location where him and his buddies played D&D games, and he tried to dope himself with methaqualone to commit suicide that night, but failed. Other than that incident, he went into hiding with a friend. People say that during this time the two were seen at a local role-playing game convention, which included Dungeons & Dragons. So were they really there, or was this just the imagination of people once again? Let us know in the comments. Deer was a reporter hired to track Egerbert down, and he actually wrote a whole book, The Dungeon Master, which covers page to page this entire case and explains in more detail his theory, which was that Egbert's actions were down to him participating in the game Dungeons & Dragons. Egerbert eventually committed suicide on August 16, 1980, and he was not the only one. More than 10 other cases of young children linked with Dungeons & Dragons were present at the time, and anxiety was rising. So, do you think Deer was right? Egerbert was indoctrinated by the dark cult of Dungeons & Dragons? Or was it simply all in his mind? Let us know in the comments. In all fairness, there are similar cases where people have taken the escapism experience in fantasy and fiction a little too far. Joanne Rich, mother and wife, mysteriously disappeared in 1961 after reading a series of crime novels, with one in particular standing out called Into Thin Air. This book is about a housewife who disappeared from her home and her family, and the only evidence that was left behind was blood smeared with towels. Joanne's disappearance, funnily enough, was eerily similar to this. The case is similar to Egbert's, and Joanne also had suffered a troublesome childhood, which definitely flags the question, was this mind or matter? What do you think? Let us know. The game is an occult tool that opens up young people to the influence or possession by demons. Now, let's talk about BADD. BADD, Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons, was an organisation founded by a woman named Patricia Pauling. It was a group she founded after her son committed suicide in 1982, who she swears, quote, was cursed from playing the game shortly before his death. BADD, Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons, teamed up with the conservative Christians group to launch a series of attacks against Dungeons & Dragons and destroy it once and for all, including an appearance on a current affairs show, 60 Minutes, where Pauling went head to head with D&D co-creator Gary Gygax. So is D&D a cult? If we look at the evidence and the case studies, there is a lot of evidence that strongly suggests it did have an influence. However, the cases were from a time long ago where people thought differently and attitudes towards this were different. The view of role-playing games has changed over time. So what do you think about this? If you're interested in holding a game with your friends but want to make it casual and a little bit of a party, then hit the subscribe button and tune in for our next video. And I'll see you later.